Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of our Demystifying Healing podcast. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about grief. And our intention for every episode in this Demystifying Healing podcast is to free the healer within every one of us so that we can be our own healers, we can tune into ourselves, and we can be free and empowered to change ourselves to make our lives happier and better and more full of joy. So today we're talking about grief, where to find grief and how to deal with grief. So this time Shruti is going to share with us first her insights.
Oh God, this is so heavy, Olga. I was just telling Olga before we started recording that while I was preparing for this episode, I called in all the grief that I've ever experienced and all those instances of grief which my clients or my friends or my family have experienced. And it's very heavy. I mean, just to, you know, yes, as energy healers, you do, or as even empaths, you do hold a lot of emotions in your body, in your being. And yeah, it's very heavy. So I'm sorry if I'm not chirpy and bubbly in today's episode because
I feel
it's not
exactly the
good.
same. Um,
Yes.
I last episode I was very active and like really ready to speak, almost to sing. But this time I feel
Yes.
like there are many pebbles in my body and I'm just being like
Exactly.
pulled down like that. But
I
that's good
know.
because we're gonna figure out how to deal with grief. So, but grief is
Exactly.
definitely here.
I know.
It's
Grief is
like a
definitely
third person in the
everything.
conversation. You, me, and grief. We are all here, three of us. So
Oh my God. Yes. We used to have an old Indian ad on alcohol, I think, which said something like this: "You, me, and the name of that brand." So yeah. So
yeah.
so I was tuning in with my guides, preparing for this episode, and I realized that I want to speak about hidden grief. So there is a kind of grief that is socially acceptable. If you, for example, if you lose a loved one, or if an accident happens to you, or if you lose a baby, if you lose a friend, or you know, there are many cultures where there are allotted mourning periods, 40 days or more, or depending on the culture. If you're going through a period in your life where you're processing grief. But when I tuned in with my guides, I realized that there are many other kinds of grief which are rarely talked about. And in fact, it's kind of a stigma talking about it because most people won't even, I won't say most people are waking up to it. But generally, like if you mention these types of grief, uh, people would, or there is a chance that people might not consider it to be real grief, or they might say that you're overreacting, or that it's not your grief to feel. Okay, so I want to go into some of them today. So, as a practitioner, the first time I realized that there are you can grieve a career that you never had for 10, 15 years after you lost the opportunity to have that career was in my early days as a healer. So there was this man who was in his early 40s. He had a very good corporate job, and he came to me saying that he had a blunted experience of life. He couldn't experience joy. He couldn't experience uh, any emotion for that matter. There was no richness on his palette of emotions. So he was on antidepressants for a few years, and we were working through that. We were looking at the medical side of it. I'm not a medical practitioner, but yeah, we begin by asking him whether he's on meds or all of that. With all of that out of the way, we started doing processes with him. And we realized that the root cause of his grief is the fact that he wanted to be a fighter pilot back when he was in his teens. And he didn't make the list because he was an inch shorter than the requirement. And to that day, he was dealing with this grief. But since he had a high-powered corporate job, every time he had tried to articulate it to people, even his wife for that matter, every time he said it to her, you know, uh, I feel very sad about the fact that I could never become a pilot. It was just laughed off as, okay, what's the big deal? You're doing better as a businessman today. And, he was in the corporate, he had his own business as well. He was working to be an entrepreneur. So, uh, on the face of it, he had a life which was very happy. He, had a high flying life, but inside he was still that 17-year-old boy or that 18-year-old boy who, couldn't make it to the list. And yeah, so that's that. That was my first experience with the fact that people can be battling. That was my first experience with this whole idea that what we consider to be disappointment, what we as friends or family, or what we as a society can consider to be disappointment, could very well be deep grief that you're carrying, and that can manifest as depression later on. That can manifest as a lot of other mental illnesses.
Actually, my father also wanted to be a pilot when he was young. Okay. But he also couldn't make it because of a physical thing he had in his nose, something.
Okay.
I guess, I don't know, deviated subseptum or something. So they didn't they didn't accept him to be a pilot. I don't know if that was a grief for him, but it really contributed to his kind of general attitude towards life, that not everything you want, you're going to get, and in a sad way, don't expect good things. If you expect the lowest, worst stuff, then anything that's you're gonna get, you're gonna feel happy. So
happy about it. Yes.
Another sad pilot story. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, your baseline of expectations that just plunges too far, I think, when something like this happens, and which is why I call it hidden grief. Because it's actually the reason I'm calling it grief is because when you tune in, your body has certain energetic signatures. Like the way disappointment feels in your body is very different from the way grief feels in your body. Grief can actually feel like your heart space splitting into two. It actually feels like heartbreak and prolonged heartbreak for a long time. Disappointment is a milder version of this. In fact, in some people, disappointment wouldn't even hit the same chords. So when I asked my client, this particular client, to tune into what he was feeling about the fact that he could never become a pilot, it was actually grief. He told me that he felt that his his heart space was splitting into two, and that he's felt it for the longest time. And he felt that there are days when there's nobody at home and he's alone and having his coffee or tea or whatever. And when he goes back to those days, goes back to that interview or whatever, where, he realized that he's not going to make it, he felt that he actually felt like he was splitting into two. So that's not disappointment. As in, if you feel like your existence is coming to an end.
Yeah, I just tuned into this description of something splitting into two, and I just realized, for myself, what that split is. It's when that part, it's like you're splitting into something that you were attached to wanting and didn't get. So part of you is still there, because a part that desire, that curiosity, that need wasn't met and is not gonna be met. And it's like, and this part is, oh well, I'm gonna have to move on and live, and it's like the further away it goes, the worse it may feel. And if you don't deal with this part for me, it's on the left, the part on the left, it's like you're just going to be deepening this. So I guess.
Yes, exactly. Which is why all my clients who deal with deep grief, they benefit with parts work. Because as you rightly said, a part of them is left it's still, attached to that desire, and it's holding on to that desire very strongly. And it's very heavy, but I mean, I cry for hours after working with clients, dealing with grief. I mean, I don't think I can work for. I mean, there was this one client. I remember I had to take a holiday for 2 days after working with her because that was how heavy her grief was. Now, of course, I have practices where I can protect myself and, I know how to work with energy. But back then I was like, oh my God, this is because it was bringing up all my grief as well. And that's what practitioners do, right? As in, if they haven't dealt with their own grief or their own trauma or whatever resonance they have of the emotion, of the heavy emotion that they were helping their clients work through, it can really bring up, all the flavors of that emotion in you. And, it can be pretty traumatic for you if, you don't have practices of your own, or if you don't have,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um,
Yeah.
you know self-love practices or clearing practices. So, that's that. To this day, I did not realize that just talking about this first client I had would be so difficult for me, because when I was telling you how it felt in his body, I actually could feel it in my body. As in, that whole splitting apart part. It's very difficult to witness. Energetically, it's very difficult to witness because you're feeling it as well. So, yeah, that's one kind of grief. And after this, I was thinking about my friends and my family and myself and my clients, and where are we hiding grief in our life? And currently, I have a client who she's a new mother, and she just had a baby. It's 4 months old, and she's a working mom, and she has maternity leave, but that's going to run out soon. And she has an older child who's, I think, 4 years old. And she came to me and she was like, I can just do sessions with her, which are half an hour long, because, I don't have time for this. I have to, devote time to my family. And I was like, okay. And I usually don't accept clients who come with me, with a time limit, as in, okay, I just want to wind it up in 30 minutes, because it doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
But she really needed that. I could see that she was jaded and jarred, and she was really looking out, looking for help. So we sat down, and she was like, she cried a lot. I think she cried, for 30 minutes straight, she cried. And then I was like, you told me that you only have 30 minutes. So, but, it's a lot more than that. So, but by then she had opened up, and I had already adjusted for it. So, uh, the first thing that came out of her mouth was, everything is about the baby. It's as if I don't exist. And, I could see where she was coming from. And she was like, I'm so glad that finally there is a space where I can say this out loud. Because if I say this out loud to my family, my husband, my mother, I would be considered a very bad mother.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't have postpartum depression, as in she wasn't diagnosed with postpartum depression. But yeah, she did have, like, she was going towards grief because this was a second pregnancy. And the fact that even in her first pregnancy, she felt very, like, even after she became a mother the first time, she felt very unsupported. That was sort of an add on to her current experience. And it brought up all her feelings of self worth, feelings of not being worthy enough, feelings of being abandoned. And then, of course, it brought up guilt because she felt like she was competing with a baby, with her own baby. As in, why would she feel, you know, as she felt that she shouldn't feel like, she herself felt that it should be all about her baby. So why is it that, she shouldn't be having these thoughts like, um, why doesn't anybody ask after me? Or, why doesn't anybody, ask me what my love life is like? Or, are things okay between my husband and me? Do I feel sexy enough now? These are all like, very potent things which can go through a woman's mind after she becomes a mother, but it's rarely talked about. Probably with a therapist, with a practitioner, people do speak about it. But what this client told me was that even with therapists and certain practitioners, there is a lot of judgment when it comes to embodying grief after you have become a mother, because they're usually told that if you grieve, then you can pass on that grief to your baby, because children are like sponges. And while that is true, that's not the way to deal with it. I mean, if somebody is battling that kind of grief of not being seen, of being so disconnected from everybody around them after just having had a baby, and if you tell them to suppress it, the grief is still going to be there. So the
Yeah.
baby is still going to be sponging off it. You have to help the lady come out of it. So why I call this grief is because of the same energetic signature. I asked her to feel into it. And depression has a very different energetic signature. Grief has a very different energetic signature. I don't know.
So,
Uh,
can I ask you something?
yeah.
What would you say she was grieving? Like, what
She
was it that she was grieving? Like,
she was grieving the fact that it was basically disconnection. The fact that everybody was around her, as in her extended family kept coming to visit her. This was a period in her life where she was meeting all the people that she dreamt of meeting on a daily basis. But they were all there to meet the baby. And I'm making her sound very terrible, but
no,
bear with
no.
me. Wait,
Or maybe I would put in words like she was grieving. Um, yeah, I don't want to. Everything I want to say sounds like bad, but I don't mean it in a bad way. Like, it's like
I
she's
know.
grieving the, the attention that used to be hers. The I would say like light or something that used to be hers, but
Probably that was part of it. That was part of it. But I think the what was really happening to her, I'm thinking because I was kind of thinking about the energy flow. She really felt that she was alone in a room of people, that nobody, that she cannot come clean to people about the fact that she's really struggling and that she does not want to be a mother at that point. And she knew that if she said this, uh, she would be censured for it. So the disconnection, I think the word is disconnection. The fact that you have people around you and the mood is is that of celebrations, but at the end of the day, you feel that nobody's going to understand you. And there is a difference between people not understanding you and knowing that you will be persecuted for something. Maybe persecution is a very strong word, but that's the word which comes to my mind very strongly because that's how she felt. She felt that if she wasn't careful with her words in how she felt about the baby, about her experience as a mother, the fact that she wasn't enjoying it at all, she might get to hear things like, oh, there are so many women who cannot have babies. And here you have, you're a mother for the second time and you feel, you're ungrateful. So it is true that maybe she was being too hard on, or maybe she was assuming things about the people around her, but she had good reasons to feel this way because these are people she's known her entire life. So for her to, so it's not an assumption. She knows what people are like, as in she knows what the reactions usually are. So I think it's disconnection. The fact that you cannot come clean to the fact that there are parts of you, of your psyche, which can be so dark, that the people closest to you cannot handle it, and then you feel alone. Especially if it's your husband or your mother
mm,
or your favorite aunt, and that grief can live with you long after. I gave her journal prompts, and she told me that I fear that this is going to live in me long after my children are, my second child goes to school, which is true. I mean, if you don't deal with it, it's. I mean, you are going to remember these experiences, and also the fact that you have come face to face with parts of you which you thought would never exist, which you thought you'll never have. I mean, how do you feel so angry towards a baby? It's not the baby's fault. It's the fact that she was unsupported, right? But the fact that all her anger was directed at the baby, and she was, in her words, that she was still looking for approval from people around her. So logically, it didn't make sense to her because she knew that it's not the baby's fault. People should help her out, and she should be able to confide in them. But
okay. I
since
want I want to try to verbalize it again. Okay, so
yeah,
that thing like grief or attention seems like too small, but like grieving over the loss, like you said, disconnection. I don't know why I really need to verbalize it. Grief over losing a sense of connection, a lost connection, lost ability to be honest and engaging like 100% with all this family and friends.
Yes.
I feel like
Yes,
I need to verbalize it. Would you say like that can be verbalized like that?
I know. And I think I think she was also worried about, not worried as in, worried is a very germane word to use for it. She was very appalled by the fact that she could have these dark aspects because she was always the good girl.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a way, now maybe I'm being poetic here, but she was also grieving the fact that she is not this woman who's very logical or rational or, knows what needs to be done. And, the fact that she can have very dark thoughts.
Oh, I'm going to verbalize it again. Grieving also, grieving, okay, grieving the past to you, or like the grieving the image of ourselves that we thought we had, but now we see another truth. So we're kind of like grieving over that past image, which that is not congruent to what we actually see with reality. So it's like grieving over our past image of ourselves, something like that. So it's pretty complicated.
Yes, it is complicated. And oh God, I can't find the right words for anything today because it's very heavy for me. But yeah.
So I have words.
Yes, you have
You
words.
can just say yes or no.
Yes, I know. So that's that. And that's the second kind of grief. So there's another kind of grief which keeps coming up, not just with my clients, but in my friend circle as well. So yes, for this woman, I think it was about disconnection. The main grief was about disconnection, grief concerning disconnection, which brings me to the kind of grief that I have been feeling. Okay, so I grew up in a family where I was a parentified child. So my parents had mental health issues, and they would come to us, their children, to cry and to about the life issues, about the problems with each other, all of that. And then, by the time I was 14 years of age, I was giving my parents advice on what they should be doing, which was not my place as a child, but that's what happens to you when you have been forced to, parent your parents. And something very unusual would happen when, uh, after I'd give them advice, they would behave as if this was the most outrageous thing that they have ever, that had ever happened to them. That they would tell me that it isn't my place to give them advice and all of that. And at that age, I bought it. I was like, yeah, maybe it isn't my place. But the fact is that as parents, they're not supposed to come to me and with their problems. Like I was what, 12, 13, 14 years of age. And I think this began when I was 6 or 7. It began that young, as in, that was the level of enmeshment in my family. So that was that. How it started manifesting in my life, and I have some remnants of this in my life even today, is that I've seen that pattern in friends. They'd come, they would, tell me their problems and all of it. And I have a lot of friends with whom I think my only connection with them is the fact that we bond over problems, in the sense that, they tell me the problems or I tell them, my problems. So it's a bond like that. Like, I wouldn't call it a proper well-rounded friendship where we are going out or we are talking about other things or any of that. It's just this, you're talking to each other about problems. And ever since I became a healer, I've seen this pattern that there are a lot of friends like that, in my life who would tell me, their entire life and all of it, but they are not clients. And I cannot give them like professional advice because that might come across as very disrespectful. But the very fact that this is what I do for a living means that if somebody tells me a problem and if they tell me this is what is happening in my life, I don't like this, and These are my desires instead. Then I think I go into practitioner mode where I'm like, okay, would you like to work on it? Or, do you like, what is it that you really want to? But then they're like, no, no, I just wanted to listen. But then the point is that if you have listened to the same story over and over again for 4 years, you know their patterns, you know what they're doing wrong. And they expect you to sort of just hold, I mean, it's called holding space, but I think the term, the phrase holding space is now being used in a very corrupt form, where somebody is allowed to come to you and vent about their life, about everything that's going wrong. And you're not allowed to step in. Or you are not allowed to, one, you're not allowed to tell them, okay, you have to take some accountability for what's going wrong. Because if you do that, and this is just me, like my experience. If you do that, then they'd be like, "Oh, you are bringing a profession into this. We are just, we are not looking for advice." But then the problem is, but then the point is, then it's a two-way street. As in, if you keep venting to a friend the same problem about the same problem for 4 straight years, how do you expect this person not to offer you advice? How do you expect this person not to feel your pain? I mean, if you're dropping somebody voice notes at 3 a.m., at 3 a.m., and if this person reads your voice notes at 6 a.m., you are going to respond to these voice notes as a friend, right? You're going to offer them advice. But in the name of holding space, I think now people are you are expected to be disconnected from your friends.
Mm-hmm.
Are you getting what I'm trying to say? And that leads to a lot of, for me personally, that gave me a lot of grief. The fact that, okay, there are friends of mine who are, I mean, literally at their wits' end. Literally, I mean, they are in toxic relationships or, with the families or, with a man in their life or, you know, any situation, even, it could be a career situation as well. Uh, but then, yeah, you can see the patterns and, if you ask them, do you need advice? They would take their advice, but they wouldn't go all the way through with it. And, since they're not a client of yours, you cannot coach them. And it becomes this situation where there's a lot of enmeshment and um, there's not much resolution to it. And I know everything isn't about solution. Everything isn't about finding solution. There are times when somebody comes to you and they just want to, you know, cool off some steam. They just want to tell you what's happened. But if it's a pattern and if it's the same problem over a matter of 4 or 5 years, that takes a toll on the person, who's holding space. And it becomes like, I don't want to use the term toxic. I try not to use the term toxic, but it becomes toxic to the friend who's listening to it. And what I want to draw attention to is the fact that even if you're bringing your problems to somebody, the person that you're bringing, you have a relationship with the person to whom you're bringing your problems to as well. You cannot expect somebody to be a bystander. They are not a fly on the wall, especially if it's, something very dark, as in if you're talking about domestic violence or being with a man who's, you know, completely like taking advantage of you or any of that. And I have experienced domestic violence at the hands of my birth parents. So for me, like, you cannot expect me to just sit there and say, okay, it's your choice what you do with it. I'll just, hold space for you. So it's coming to grief. How that equates with grief is that the fact that you are a witness to somebody's life, the fact that they are telling you things that are so intimate to them, that are so harmful for them, but you're not allowed to step in. You don't have a voice there. And this is not to say that you are allowed to give people advice left, right, and center, because they still have the free. They are the only ones who have the free will, who have free will in the situation on what they want to do with the situation. But when you take away this person's quote unquote right to even tell you that this is a toxic situation and this is not how things should be, it can be extremely painful. And I've had situations where I have had friends and clients come to me and tell me that it's very difficult to talk to certain people in their life because they consider it a boundary violation. I have a client who has this problem with her husband. She can't like really open up to her husband and tell him, look, this is what you're doing wrong in your life. I don't want you to do this. I mean, that screams disconnection. I mean, why would you get married to somebody if you cannot tell this person your perspective on what they're doing wrong. You can have a conversation about it. I mean, of course, a husband can tell her, no, I don't think that's the case. I'm doing this because, whatever. That's a conversation. But then if you feel that you have to censor yourself from telling your husband or your spouse things that really bother you, if that's not disconnection, I don't know what is. And when I tune into the collective, my own relationships with some of my friends, it's like it gives me, I have that same feeling, that feeling in my chest where, it breaks into two. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, you know, part of it could be enmeshment because I am coming from a background where I was deeply enmeshed with my parents. I didn't know where I ended and they began. And I think parentified children who have always had to take responsibility for their parents, they sort of end up with a savior complex. They feel that if somebody comes to them with their problems, they have to step in. And yes, one has to unlearn that because you cannot move about the world like that. You cannot be trampling about other people's free will. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a situation where you're not allowed to voice what you feel about certain situations in your partner's life or in your friend's life. And that's disconnection. And even my therapist friends have told me that you end up feeling a bit alone if you cannot voice your opinion on things. It sort of makes you realize that maybe even they are not open to listening to you and offering you advice if it comes to that. If there are situations in your life where you need advice or where, and it's a very uncommon, but we live in a very atomized society where in the name of,
Atomize?
yeah, as in we're just splitting into atoms and
Okay.
as in we're just breaking apart and there's no like real connection, so to speak. So yeah, that makes me very sad. And when I tune into it in my meditations, that does come across to me as grief. Because how can you expect to be part of somebody's life in a deeply, deeply intimate way? And then be asked to just be a bystander.
Mm-hmm.
So
So, like,
disconnection.
since I love to verbalize things, I would say grief over not being able to be the full you, the full alive, true you.
Yes, you do. That's part of it. Because you have to hide parts of you in such relationships.
And it's like really hard for me to hear because yeah, you're, and I understand like you live in a different society, and that's what's interesting about our conversations because we come from different cultures, different societies, everything. So, yeah, like I don't have this rule, and I don't know anybody who has that rule except you actually. But maybe like it's people like this is the first time I hear of it, and maybe people online with posting different communities, but I don't actually read so much. But like I don't have that rule that you have to listen to someone and you can't voice your opinion, because like with my friends, that's what we do. We try to convince each other that we have all the answers. And like if I hear my friends say that they have a problem, I'll there are different roles. Like as a friend, I will say everything that I feel. Otherwise, what's the point of being friends? Like I don't I can't just like watch and then not do anything. Um, it's different. Like you said, I'm also a healer, so I noticed this difference when I became a healer. I realized that my communication and my relationship with my friends changed too. Because as a friend, I used to be all really outspoken. And when they would tell me the problem, I would just say, I would be like really, really, open, outspoken. I'd say, you gotta do this because it works for me. So I just told them, look, it works for me. Like, you gotta do this. I swear this is gonna work for you. And I just told them all my opinions, what they should do. But I didn't expect them to do anything. Like, it's their choice what they want to do. And I can't tell them, like, if they just keep telling me the same thing over and over again, I keep telling them the same thing. Yeah, I could just, like, we can call each other, oh, you're just an idiot then. But it doesn't have a,
Oh, that's very different.
It doesn't have a meaning like I hate you or something. It's just like, oh, you're an idiot, But we know that we love each other. And I guess it's about different kinds of people. Some people get really offended. And I guess that's why there's like a connection. Are you friends or not? I guess like with my friends, we can call each other anything. And we can express anything. And if I can't do that, then that person is not going to be my friend, because I do it. I am in a relationship with the person as a friend because I am also gaining something out of it. I am being me, Yeah. So if they don't like me being me, then we shouldn't be friends. They should go and make a friend with somebody else who's very careful with their words and is like a fly on the wall and doesn't speak. And that's perfect for somebody else, but not perfect, not great, like at all for me. But when I became a healer, I changed this in a way that I'm still outspoken because I, like with my friends, I'm a friend, I'm not a healer. But as a healer, I realized like, oh, I used to assume that they have all the same desires as me and they have all the same, everything is same, and so therefore my experience should fit them. And that was me as a friend before I became a healer. But after I became a healer, now I can tune into them and I can understand that they're very different people. They have different desires. They have different things they want to do. They have different problems. They have different ways how they want to live. So in that sense, I became like a bit more neutral, but still outspoken. I guess I became like a mix between a healer and friend. Yes. But it's like still, when I'm with a friend, I don't have a responsibility to heal them. I can be whatever I want. And sometimes it means speaking from me as Olga, sometimes speaking as me as a healer. But it's still my choice, and it's their choice every day whether they want to be my friend or not. If they don't want to be my friend, that's okay. Like that's our free time. Like nobody's forcing us to be friends or something. But as a healer, yeah, it's a different story. And normally I don't even make decisions on how to say something. I listen to their spiritual team, and their spiritual team tells me, not dictates me, but gives their perspective, like how to say something and what to say. And sometimes the team says, say it harsh, and that person is not going to be a client. And that sometimes that's it, because they're not in the state of, actually, like we're talking about healing now. I guess we should go back to grief, but yeah, that's going to be a separate conversation. But yeah, I mean, you have the right as a friend to be yourself. And if that means speaking your voice, back to the episode 1, if that means speaking your voice, speaking your truth, sharing what you want to share, and if that is not somehow not acceptable, or because it seems like they share whatever they want to share, but you can't. So if we
in these circumstances, in these specific circumstances.
So if you put you in a room, it seems like, if 90% of the room is taken up by your friend, and you are just the 10% just watching, and not by some imaginary rule coming from I don't know where, that you're supposed to hold space and never say anything for 4 years, yeah, that seems like you're not allowing yourself to be the full you. And if you be expressing yourself means that friend is going to say, I don't like you anymore, you're evil, you offend me, I don't like you, well then you're not a match for friendship. And it's okay.
Yeah, I just realized that this is a realization I just had. Maybe it's got to do with the fact that, so for me, I think authenticity or coming back to your authenticity is the core value for this lifetime or for this phase of my life or whatever. Like up until this point, that's what I wanted to do. I have always wanted to know what I really wanted out of this person or the situation, or where do I see my life going. So authenticity is the key for me. And you're very right about not assuming that others want the same thing as you. But what do you do about people who tell you that they want something? So, as in they're very clear on what they want, but their actions don't match up. Like, for example, there are friends who, this is again, I don't know why I keep bringing up relationship, coaching advice, but yeah, for example, if somebody wants to get married, okay, and has a specific love list, so to speak, that they want a certain kind of husband or they want a certain kind of partner, okay, and for 4 years they have not been dating those kinds of people, and they usually choose people who are non-serious, who make it very clear to them that they're not looking for anything serious. So that's fixable. I mean, just change the kind of men that you are dating. That's like simple advice, right? It doesn't even have to be advice from a relationship coach. It's just commonsensical advice which anybody would give, right?
Yeah,
So
a friend's advice. Yeah,
exactly, that's just for, I mean, try saying you have this problem to somebody on the subway and probably they'll give you the same advice that just change the pool of people that you're dating. And I understand why it's difficult for people to, I mean, it's got to do with self-worth, as a lot of people, they don't believe that they can have a relationship like that, or they're not comfortable bringing their full self to the table. And probably that's why they haven't made up their mind to date men who are looking for marriage. So it's very easy being with an iffy person. It's very easy being with a dilly-dally, oh, let's see where things go kind of a person, because a person who really wants to commit to you, who really wants to marry you, he knows what he wants in a partner. He wants a relationship where there's absolute intimacy, where there's absolute authenticity, where, I mean, that it comes with the territory of wanting a healthy marriage or a relationship with someone. But so if you as a woman are not ready to be fully seen for who you are, or if you have shame associated with certain parts of you, you wouldn't be comfortable with a person like that. So I know why, despite knowing that you have to change the pool of men that you're dating, you know that you're supposed to do this. Despite knowing that, you won't do this because you have wounds. But then the point is that 4 years is a long time not to be working on those wounds. Right. My point is that you're very right that sometimes how I see it is that sometimes you say you have certain desires, but maybe those are not your desires, or maybe you're not really ready to claim those desires. So if you go to a friend saying, oh, I want this and this is not happening, and they sort of tell you, oh, just do this, and then it becomes sort of this tug of war between you two, where like,
yeah. It seems to me like,
and with clients you can always draw a boundary. Again, this is not about clients, but with clients you can have a very solid boundary. You're like, you came to me for specific advice, and these are the things you need to do for it. This is the inner work. This is, these are the journal prompts. This is the energy work I'll be doing, with you. You can have those solid boundaries. But with friends, you barely, you can come across as very bossy. Those are not the terms you have with a friend, right? Because she's not a client or he's not a client. So, but then, yeah, it's like, forget about coaching and all of that, forget about advice. It's just this general disconnection. As in, when somebody comes and tells me that they want this, and I'm like, yes, it really means something to this person. They really want this. So what can they do to have this? So that's where I am coming, like when I'm talking to a friend or, whoever. And then if it's blown out of proportion and if it's seen as, you know, unsolicited advice, then I'm like, okay, for 4 years you have been just ranting about the same thing. So again, I'm not shifting blame. I don't want this to be a session of, an episode of blame shifting. What I'm saying is that it just really bothers me, this disconnection that people have with each other now. This inability of, probably there's a blind spot in me as well, if it bothers me so much. This inability to sort of see the other for what they are and for just accepting them for what they are. And the fact that, yeah, you can get tired of somebody, of being holding space for somebody who's walking around in, who's going in circles. And yeah, I spend like, I've spent a lot of nights thinking whether I was bossy, whether I was, trust me, Olga, I've had those nights where I've, really wondered if I was the one with the problem here. And partly maybe I am the one with the problem, because it is.
Well, yeah, because you're not allowing yourself to be free and make your own decisions that make you happy. And like a friendship relationship is a free relationship. It's not a client healer relationship. You didn't exchange money, you didn't sign any contract, you didn't do anything like that. You don't have obligations. You like, if it's a true friendship, at least I'm talking purely from my friendships where we have absolutely no expectations of each other and no obligations, no nothing. And no obligations to hold your tongue and no obligations to speak either. Like there's nothing, there's no rules, So and a friendship, like for me, is just based on desire to actually be happy in life. Like the certain friendships make me happy, having those friendships. And it takes two to tango. I like to say it takes two to tango. So both of you guys need to experience, are experiencing something wonderful from a friendship. And if you realize that you can't get anything wonderful from this friendship, then that's, then there's no need for this friendship. I'm sorry.
I know, and that's
like you have that freedom. You have that freedom to make that decision for yourself.
Which is where grief comes in. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Yes, because you have that freedom, and it's so heartbreaking to have been friends with somebody for 15 years, and then to have to make the decision that, oh, I'm not available for this kind of, these kinds of rants anymore,
and that happened because you have become a different person now. Because for 15 years you have been one kind of person who agreed with like, oh, it's okay. Like, I don't, I need to limit myself with this 100 rules that I can't do this in my friendship. And you were that kind of person at that time. Changing. You became a healer. And to a point, we always healing ourselves in being a healer. First we heal ourselves, right? Then we heal others. And you are a different person now, and you start to have different realizations, and you start to make different choices, different decisions, and you start to see, wait a minute, I was following all these rules, and I was limiting my ability to have very, very like free and alive friendships where I can actually just be myself with another person who also wants to be themselves and have this interaction of that makes both people happier. I mean, that's marriage too, right? Like, why did we get married? Oh, because we want to be even happier than we are separate. So friendship too, like, oh, we're when we're together, we are happier, So if you have become a different person, you start to realize all these limitations that you don't need to follow. And you realize that, oh, I can be different and I can have different choices. I can make different choices. So naturally, there's a grief for that past you in the past, that you're letting her go. Like you're letting her go.
That's the grief of just having to let go of a certain friendship.
You're grieving for your own self too. Like for your own self. I was a Shruti that was like this, but I am changing now and I'm becoming a different Shruti. And every time we heal, actually, there is grief. Every time we heal from anything, because we are becoming different. And the new me is looking at the old me. and going like, I need to let you go. The old Olga needs to go, and because I'm here now, the new Olga. And that's it. Every time we heal, we transform. That's healing, right? We change ourselves, we transform, we become a different person, slightly different person, still looks the same. But but we're letting that old me go that used to do something unhealthy for myself, for example. And like I stopped doing that unhealthy thing. Now I'm a different person, but there is a grief of that person, me, who's leaving my life. And that's natural.
Yeah, it's very difficult. But
and it's wonderful. That's part of the reason why healing is difficult, because we need to let something go. To let something new in, something needs to be gone. I have this closet, but if I want to buy new clothes, I got to make space for them. And I got to let my clothes go, some of them, in order to bring more clothes. So I don't know how good is that example, but yeah, that's a part of the reason why healing is so hard, because there's actually always grief involved over our previous selves.
So yeah, I know.
Pretty cool.
I know.
So how do we deal with grief?
Yes.
So I tuned into grief too, and after my meditations, in my meditations, I was taken to my school, and I was shown also different kinds of grief. And just gonna mention like quickly to show different kinds of grief and how to deal with it. In my school, I remember that every year there would be a graduation of the oldest kids, and all the other kids, they were going for the summer holidays. And then there was a lot of grief happening, and there was a lot of kids crying, even kids who are going to come back after summer. They're crying. And they were saying goodbye to all their teachers. And one day was just dedicated to all these kids running around saying goodbye to their teachers. Sometimes the teachers won't come back, the new teachers will come the next year. So, and the kids, it was an international school. Sometimes they would go to another country or something. So everybody was crying. It was a very emotional time for everybody. They would have these shirts, and they would like ask everybody to sign the shirts for memory, and everybody was emotional. And I wasn't. Because I didn't like school, and I didn't feel like connected to most people there, not to teachers, not to friends. As I told you before, like I always limited myself to like the things that I would want to talk about, nobody connected to that. And I would be feeling very lonely, and I wouldn't connect to everybody. And I didn't like school, and I felt like it was a waste of time. I didn't. I actually quit school, and I just did the exams because I didn't like school. So my team was saying, look, all of them were grieving, and you were not. I was actually annoyed. Like, we didn't have to come today. I didn't have to come to school today because I don't need to run around crying. I never had those shirts with the signatures. And my team was like, look, they're grieving and you're not. Why? And we grieve only when we were attached to something, when something gave us something, like an answer to a question, fulfillment of a desire, it gave us something, pleasure. And when we're letting that go, naturally, there's going to be a grief when we were attached to it, when it had meaning. And they're like, you didn't grieve because you weren't attached to it. It didn't meet your desire. It didn't answer your question. It was just something you really didn't like. So you didn't grieve. So they explained the nature. And then they're like, did you grieve about anything? And actually was, I remembered my locker. That was the only thing that I grieved in the school, my locker. Because, and they're like, why? Why is that the only thing that you grieved over school? And I was like, in that public space of no privacy and very, very crowded, noisy place, my locker was the only place that was privately mine, and that was it was under my control and nobody looked there. It was my little space, And they say, are you grieving over that locker now at 38? And I'm like, no. And they're like, why? And I said, because I have a house. I have a house in this world, public world full of crowded, a lot of people, a lot of noise. I have my private space, which is which is our house here. I live here. This is my home. And it's like a very giant locker, I guess. So they said I would grieve over that locker if I wouldn't have that need met in another way. But because I have that need for privacy and my personal space met with a much greater, locker, which is my house, naturally I don't grieve over that. I don't miss that locker. They use the word miss, I don't miss that locker. I don't miss that school for sure because it didn't really connect with me. But I'm sure the kids who were crying over school, they do miss. They may miss their school if they didn't have the same needs met now in a new way. But if they have their needs met in a new way, they probably don't necessarily miss school. And they said this is how letting go of grief works. And I was shown also another example where I moved from Bangkok to a village in Turkey. And I find myself missing all the restaurants that were in Bangkok because they had like every restaurant there. Indian restaurant, Mexican restaurant, Japanese restaurant, Korean restaurant, Vietnamese restaurant, you name it. There's every restaurant is there. And the food was amazing. So I find myself missing those restaurants because over here there's only one food, which is Turkish. And they say the reason you're missing it, I often find myself grieving over the things I left behind because, and I can't finish grieving because I can't fulfill these needs here. That's why I'm still grieving and I'm missing that. Do I regret? Then regret comes along. Do I regret making that decision? No, because in this village, I get to wake up looking at mountains. I get to walk around in nature. I get to look at animals. I get to live in a silence, and I get to breathe clean air, which is impossible to have if you're going to have all the restaurants of the world, because nobody's going to build all the restaurants in the world in a clean and quiet place because nobody going to be a client and they're going to go bankrupt naturally. So you need to make, you need to make a choice, either you go live in a very crowded city, you're going to have all the restaurants in the world, or you're going to live here and fulfill your desire for clean air and nature, and you're going to let go of those restaurants. So that's another example of grief over, I often grieve over what I left in Bangkok. And it's still alive in me because that desire is not met. As soon as this desire is met, I probably won't forget about it. I won't grieve. And another, I guess most people talk about grief when they talk about somebody passing away.
Yeah.
And my father passed away about 2.5 years ago. And I went through all these emotions. And I asked my guys about the grief. And they're like, are you grieving now? And then I'm like, no, because I guess this is a special case because I can actually talk to the soul of my father, thanks to my abilities of, psychic communication. I don't feel that he's gone. I can actually talk to him anytime I want. Sometimes he comes and talks to me. Sometimes he comes and tells me how to be careful about electricity in my house and that I should buy a fire extinguisher. And he tells me that I didn't turn off the teapot in the kitchen and blah, 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 blah. You know? So I don't feel like he's gone. So I don't grieve. The only kind of grief that I went through was letting go, grieving the physical aspects of him being around. But now he's not in the physical, but he's almost like his physical sometimes. So my guys just kind of pointed to these different kinds of griefs, like you. So the first example was the locker. Second example was the restaurants. Third example was my father. And I asked them, how would you say that it's best to deal with grief? What do I do with grief while it's still, still active, let's say? Because with my father, it was already done. So let's say you have an active grief. And I said, what advice do you have for people, for me, and for people to deal with grief and to be their own healers in that way? And they showed me a bucket and it's pouring out everything. And the thing that was pouring out was colorful lines, like that video that I made about emotions, little lines, colorful lines. And that's how I see emotions, clear lines. And like the bucket just went, and they meant like just feel all the emotions that are part of that grief, that are related to that grief. Feel all of them completely. And they said, try to be conscious of them. Like, don't try to block yourself and not feel something, because a lot of them will be uncomfortable, but they do have an ending. If you don't feel them now, you will block the process of grieving, and it will be stuck, and you will have to come back to do it again if you want to heal that part, because it will get worse. So they said, listen to all the emotions, because like just give into an emotion. Let's say even like fear, let's say one of the emotions is fear, and nobody wants to feel that, so we can block it unconsciously. But here the trick is to actually feel it and consciously listen to that fear, because that fear is telling you something about you. And they say, ask questions. Why am I feeling this emotion right now? And it's like, they said, don't be afraid to feel fear, because it will go like this and then it will finish. But if you 100% give into it, let it go and just feel it. And when we allow ourselves to feel each emotion, they're saying this, they showed like grief will have a bunch of emotions, a lot of emotions, and they will all tell you some information about you and your relationship to that thing that you're grieving. And they said, first of all, pick and choose your desires. Not pick and choose, like go and analyze your desires relevant to that thing that you are grieving. Like what is the thing that, like what need did that thing meet in me? What desire? Analyze those desires. Analyze actually look at your desires and see which ones you still want to explore and meet, and which ones you can let go of, because that is a part of grief. Like, for example, maybe I thought I wanted to do this, but do I actually still want to do it? Like, reconsider it. Do I still have that passion for something? And they said, if yes or no, the way you pick and choose is diving into those emotions that come up and asking, why do I feel this emotion? For example, if it's like fear, like they say, what is the fear telling you? What are you afraid of? And let's say, if it's about, let's say, my father, oh, fear, because that actually my father provided a lot of safety for me in many, many senses, financial safety, um, and emotional safety. There was a lot of safety things that he provided. So um, they're saying go into it and then discover your need for safety and discover how you can meet your own needs for safety. Are you meeting those needs? And if you are meeting those needs, become aware of that. And as you become aware of that, it's like you're fulfilling those needs. And in that sense, you don't have to have that fear anymore, because it's like almost like a part of you didn't get the update that you can provide your own need for safety. And you, in fact, like you have been providing it for yourself already for many, many years since I started working. And they said, become aware of it, hear it, listen to it. And once you become aware of it, a part of the grief has been done, and the same goes for every emotion. And ask yourself questions. And if that need is not met, then ask, why do I feel like only that thing, person, or event could meet that need of mine? How can I meet it now? If yes, how? If not, how can I perhaps find something else to meet that need? And also distinguish between healthy needs, like you don't want to heal yourself out of your natural needs and wants and desires. That's not what we do, right? But some of our needs do come from a wounded place. We may feel like, I need this person, but maybe we don't really need that person. We need something that they give us, something else. So they're like, look at that something else and see if you need this triangle. Maybe you can get that thing in another way. Or they say, even consider, do you actually need that thing? And why do you think you need that thing? And if it comes from a natural, healthy place, it will stay. And if it comes from a wounded place of delusion, confusion, and like belief that I'm not enough or something, all these unhealthy things, you're going to have an unhealthy desire, which you can, again, look at, deconstruct, and wonder, maybe I don't need that because I'm actually good. They're saying, ask all these questions and become aware and conscious of them. And that's how you deal with grief, and probably with other stuff too. But I didn't ask, I just asked about grief. So that's what I got to empower us as our own healers. And it always goes to self-awareness and honesty. That's the tough part, being honest with yourself.
Oh my God. So we did a lot of behind the scenes for this as well, which will probably be, which we won't put in the podcast probably, but I want the audience to know that this entire session, it took like, I think almost 4 hours to shoot. We'll just be giving an hour, 1 hour of it.
Yeah.
And most of it was Olga giving me personal therapy. I worked through a lot of shit today, sitting with Olga. And yeah, I really feel like I cleared a lot today. The grief I have about certain friendships ending, that was like, there was a lot of stuck energy there, and you helped me work with it. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you. Thanks for listening all the way to the end of this episode. And we hope that you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it, actually. Please write any comments that you guys have, any questions, any follow-up concerns that you might have. This is all very interesting to us. And Please join our community and Facebook group that we have just recently created, which is called the Demystifying Healing Podcast Facebook group. So we look forward to talking to you, having a dialogue with you. And please click like and subscribe if you like our content, so we know that you like it. Thank you, Shruti, so much. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you. Okay, thanks, you guys, and see you in the next. We hope to see you in the next episode. Goodbye.